Everything from self-repeal to now the little sisters of the poor continue to chip away at what some call Obamacare, others call the Affordable Care Act, and a third call a hot mess. What am I talking about? Let's talk about it next on Get Right with Lenny McAllister, starting right
now. Get Right with Lenny McAllister.
Hail, Holy Queen and throne above, oh Maria.
The way we help bring back America and we build the bridges and bring people together is by making sure we hold everybody accountable in a 360 fashion. So let me close with this. Yes, there is a change that we can believe in, but it will never come from a politician or a government program. We got to move away from the American Idol soundbite nature of politics and back to the American statesman of humble servant leadership that we used to see in politics. It is time to reel in government. It is time to roll out the era of the new American citizen. If we can continue to get some common sense governing from both sides of the aisle, we can finally get Americans through the recession, not just Wall Street. We need people that can change the crisis that we're seeing, and that's why, as a proud Republican, I go through the jail ministry. I speak to the kids in the streets. And so I'm never going to lay down being a Republican or being a conservative, just as much as I'll never lay down being a proud African American.
I feel like a black Republic. Money I got coming in. Can't turn my back.
Welcome to the Friday edition of Get Right with Lenny McAllister, or as my friend Cliff Kelly says at WVON in Chicagoland, Chicago, Illinois, the Talk of Chicago, 1690 AM. Hello. And I always like doing that every now and then because Cliff's a wonderful guy, and he always did right by me while I was there. So every now and then I like to start out a broadcast or a podcast with a hello, just to kind of let him know I'm still thinking about him. Anywho, it's you and me here, Get Right with Lenny McAllister. Happy Friday to you. You know the drill. You know how this works. On Twitter, it's LENNYMCALLISTER. On Facebook, two walls, same name, LENNY, capital M, small c, capital A, two L's, ISTER. You and me vibing back and forth. I always appreciate the retweets. I always appreciate the comments. I always appreciate the back and forth conversation. Please keep it going. I appreciate it very, very much. Those of you in the Pittsburgh market, I'm going to remind you once again that not only did I have an opportunity to talk on Pittsburgh Now earlier this morning, I also will have an opportunity to guest host Night Talk, Get to the Point. That is the Friday edition of Night Talk that I will be guest hosting tonight at 8 p.m. on the Pittsburgh Cable News Channel. That's PCNC. For those of you that are not in the Pittsburgh area, that started in around 1994 as basically the Pittsburgh version of CNN. It's kind of like, I guess the example that I would consider would be what you see in Chicago with CLTV, which is part of the WGN family. So it's basically the same exact thing as that. It's part of NBC here in Pittsburgh, WPXI. It just so happens to be on the cable systems here. So if you have access to that, whether you're in Pittsburgh or the tri-state area, eastern Ohio, northern West Virginia, or you're going further east towards Greensburg and Johnstown, please tune in. Would greatly appreciate that. I'll have a couple wonderful guests on there, and we'll get a chance to get to news of the day, not just in Pittsburgh, but perhaps we'll get to national news. More than likely we'll stay regional there. But on this is something that impacts everybody. So I would love your feedback. Again, you know where to find me on Twitter and on Facebook. The little sisters of the poor. As if the Obama administration needed any more people to take on, people to go after them, this, that, and the other. Here you have the little sisters of the poor. As the Obama administration is right in the midst of their self-repeal of the ACA, their self-rollback, if you will. This is kind of like Walmart rolling back prices, except this is a presidential administration rolling back their landmark legislation. We keep seeing it, but now this is not a voluntary rollout or rollback, if you will. This is not a voluntary self-repeal. This is, once again, the courts or the American people or legislators or governors or the Obama administration saying this is not a good law and we're going to put some things into place to stay aspects of the law. What am I talking about? There was a ruling earlier today where the Little Sisters of the Poor won a stay from the courts, basically saying that they do not have to live up to the mandate, which requires employers to provide birth control through their employer-provided health insurance. Now, you may sit there and say, so what? One of the arguments that came down when this law was being put into place, one of the arguments that came up in 2012 was this war on women, war on women's rights, war on women voters, all this other jazz coming from the Democratic Party towards Republicans. Now, of course, Todd Aiken and others bought into it and made it very, very convenient for this narrative to play out. And it did play out, and it played out well, and it hurt Republicans. I get that. But that came from the Obamacare law, where it became initially a war on women because you're not allowing women to be able to have free birth control through their health care providers. Then it became the church saying, no, this is the Obama administration having a war on the Catholic Church because you're forcing the church as an employer to provide birth control and the morning after pill and other type of contraceptive medications, contraceptive, I guess more than anything, it's not necessarily medications, but I guess you would call it access to contraceptives in varying forms. Not necessarily abortion, but and one obviously could argue that abortion is not a contraception. But contraceptive measures, contraceptive methods in an array of forms. And what the Catholic Church has repeatedly argued, I mean, everything from Sandra Fluke on forward, that if you come to a Catholic institution where you know the religious beliefs in place, does that mean just because the Catholic Church employs as part of, I don't know, Catholic University of America, or has a student health care plan when you're a student at, I don't know, Georgetown University, Sandra Fluke, or in this instance, you work for the Little Sisters of the Poor. You know the Roman Catholic Church's position on contraception. You know their position on premarital sex. So why would you force, and this is what it boils down to, why would you force an employer that, by the way, I don't know, is almost twice as old, or actually, if you look at it, 10 times as old, roughly, as the United States of America, and answers to a higher authority, by the way. Why would you force that institution to violate their basic rights, particularly under the First Amendment, freedom of religion? Now, everybody that sits there and says, no, this is about health care, they're a provider, there are certain secular laws that they have to follow. You can make an argument for that, except for this. When you are established as a brand, and if you want to get into secular law, let's move to this. Let's get into business law, business perceptions, business ethics, if you will. If you have a business, and by the way, we all know that America is all about the free market system. Whether you agree or disagree, it really, really is. Democrats like big ballin' too. So it's not just a Republican thing. Let's dig into the business aspect of this. If you have, again, agree, disagree, you know where to find me on Twitter or on Facebook. If you have a brand as an institution, you're Nabisco. You use chocolate chips, you make cookies, you sell them all around the world. If the government comes and forces you to use mints instead of chocolate chips, forces you to make cupcakes instead of cookies, but you still get to call it the same name, aren't you messing with the very essence of the business brand? We make Chips Ahoy cookies. People expect these things to be full of delicious chocolate chips. You are now replacing the chocolate chips with Tic Tacs, with mints. You're replacing them with walnuts, and you want me to sell these things to a bunch of people that are allergic to nuts. You're messing with my business brand. People may not buy them as much. It may repulse people. It's ruining my brand, if nothing else. Now, a similar, not obviously an exact science analogy, but you get my point. Take it to the Catholic Church. It's not just about the morning after pill, although people will sit there and say, this is about the Catholic Church not agreeing with RU 486. Yes, that's part of it. And if you lump that into contraception, that's a big issue. But more than that, the Catholic Church stands against premarital sex. Now, before you sit there and come to me and say, hey, Len, let's before you cast stones here, you do realize you're living in a glass house. I'm not saying, what I'm saying to you is this. I'm not saying that every single Catholic lives up to that. Dogma and what everyday practitioners of a faith do are completely different things. So before you want to start getting into Catholics have premarital sex, what about the priest and the altar boys and all that other stuff that you want to go to? If you're a Christian from something other than the Catholic sect, the Roman Catholic faith within the realm of Catholicism, I'm going to ask you to back off real quick before I start going into preachers and sleeping with people's wives, before I start going into preachers and $1 million jets that they own, before I start going into mega churches and multi-million-dollar preachers and poor parishioners. Let's hold off, because we can all do this all day long. It's not necessarily about what the practitioners practice in this instance, even though obviously you want them to practice what the dogma is. What this is about is dogma and a brand. From a business standpoint, the Catholic Church has a dogma that, from a secular perspective, is their brand. And even if you don't want to get into the First Amendment aspect of this, which, by the way, you should, but even if you don't want to, even if you're an atheist, even if you're one of the folks pushing for the Satanist statue out in Oklahoma, crazy folks. Yeah, it is crazy. It's insane to go against God. The end. Back to my point. Even if you want to argue from a secular position exclusively, you cannot in the United States of America ask a business to go against their brand, the essence of what makes their business their business. Now, one could argue, and I hear you, I hear the wheels ticking over there. So agree, disagree, voice it on Twitter. I know where some of you may go with this. Well, what about, what Rand Paul, a fellow Republican of yours, telling people that maybe segregation or desegregation wasn't a good idea because people had a brand that they would be able to eat in an establishment that was whites only. And if you own the business and that's part of your brand, to guarantee that type of environment to other individuals, isn't that the same thing? No, it's not. Because what you're saying is, I'm not going to provide you a service that if you have all the other means, for example, you're a hot dog joint. You're telling me you're a hot dog joint with an ideological bent? No, you're a hot dog joint. That's different than a religious institution that has built their religious institution on a certain set of tenets, a certain set of beliefs. I mean, one could argue the Ku Klux Klan as a business has a right to operate as a business based on the ideologies that they have. Now, of course, one could argue what's the service they're providing, this, that, and the other. There's a reason why they're allowed to exist, because as a nonprofit organization, which in essence is a business, they're just not raising a profit, they have a certain set of beliefs. As a hot dog joint that just doesn't want to give hot dogs to African Americans or to Latino Americans or to Asian Americans or to women or to men based on discrimination, that's different. That's different than saying we are a brand, in this instance, a religious brand that has this established dogma that has existed for decades, in some instances, centuries, and we are going to, in essence, use that religious brand to cement a business brand in the United States of America. People come to Catholic University of America because it is Catholic. People come to Georgetown University not just because it's a great institution or it has a great law school, but because of its tradition within the Roman Catholic faith. Notre Dame, touchdown Jesus. Yeah, and we can go on and on and on about this. Even here in Pittsburgh, Duquesne University. We can go on and on and on about this. So that, from a business standpoint, the federal government, to me, has a hard time telling an institution that has created a brand to go and circumvent that brand and do something that is it contravenes that brand for the sake of following a law that it doesn't agree with. That's outside of the First Amendment. Now, let's take that for all of you that don't believe in God, or all of you that don't believe that religion should play that much in the life of everyday Americans, let's combine that now with the First Amendment, which is freedom of religion. So you have freedom of religion. You establish a business brand based on your First Amendment rights. And you subsequently promote a business brand where you're going to attract thousands of people, whether it be as consumers or employees, based on your brand. 2014 or not, you're attracting people to you based on your brand, based on the First Amendment freedom of religion combined. And when you take the business brand that is leaning on the First Amendment right, which is freedom of religion, and that decades-long, centuries-long, millennia-long brand that has been developing and changing and shifting and growing and massaging over the course of 2,000 years, how do you as a government go up against that? Well, we're finding out from the courts that you're going to have a hard time doing that. Which goes back to what many, many, many people have said. This law is bad. It's not a good law. That doesn't mean that everything in this law is bad. And again, I wish Republicans would have said this in 2009. There are certain things we don't mind adopting in this law. That's generally not what you heard from Republicans in 2009. Generally what you heard from Republicans in 2009 was, this law is horrible and President Obama is the devil. Oh wait, that was Bobby Boucher's mama. Well, she probably said it too. I think she probably votes Republican. She's rural Louisiana. She probably is part of red country. Red district, absolutely. But back to my point. If the Republicans would have said that there were some good points to the ACA that were being proposed in 2009, I think that they would have an easier time showing what was wrong with this law. And so as the Obama administration continues to self-repeal, as you continue to see judges take whacks at this law, as you continue to see governors push back on this law, as you continue to see the approval ratings of this law continue to plummet, and as this president approaches a State of the Union address where he's going to have to talk about this, if he ignores this, it's going to look very, very, very bad. There's still egg, maybe not on his face, but it's still on his shoes. He's still wiping it off of his handkerchief. It wasn't that long ago that the website failed. It's still bad numbers as far as enrollment. That's still a situation he still has to deal with. He's going to have to address this. And on the heels of the Little Sisters of the Poor, which, by the way, if you're going to have any type of lawsuit to go up against a whole bunch of old nuns, and you're the big old United States of America federal government, that's a very hard optics war to win in the public's eye. And that's another interesting thing about this. So you have the Little Sisters of the Poor saying that we have a business brand that you're telling us to contravene at a very fundamental way, in a very fundamental fashion. And it's based on my First Amendment rights of freedom of religion. You're going to take that, and then you're going to go up against the federal government, which usually doesn't look too great when it comes to some of these issues anyway. And then the Obama administration, which has been flubbing politics as it is, has only been able to win certain incidences because they've been going up against Republicans that have been flubbing just a little bit more. Now, this Obama administration, with the blotched Obamacare website rollout, with the problems galore, with people getting dumped from their insurance plans, with the premiums going up for a lot of people across the country, with access to doctors being cut off in a lot of different ways across the country, now has to go up and put their image and try to win an optics war in the public eye against the Little Sisters of the Poor. You gotta love it. Now, granted, I know the courts are not supposed to be swayed by all that, but let's be real. Pretty much everything in America is political, whether they admit it or not. Whether they admit it or not, most of the time you can basically guess with the United States Supreme Court how they're going to rule, which way they're going to lean. You can pretty much guess the votes because it's based on who appointed them, which means it's based on political philosophy more often than not, whether that's organic or very, very sinister. I don't think it's sinister. I think it's more organic, if you ask me. But if that's the case, If that's the case, you're still going to be dealing with politics. And if you're going to still be dealing with politics, you're still dealing with political optics. If you're still dealing with political optics, how do you, as the Obama administration that continues to roll back their own law, continue to see people complain about this law, continue to see approval ratings fall on this law, continue to see a bad economy in some regards because of this law and the regulations around this law? How do you win an optics war against the little sisters of the poor? I'm going to say that they might not. I'm going to say that as of right now, they're losing that optics war. And as of right now, if these types of lawsuits continue to come up with these type of litigants going against the Obama administration, much like how they had to pull back down in Louisiana with the school choice program, it's kind of hard for the federal government to go up against the interest of poor black people when they're saying they're fighting for poor black people. Just the same, it's very hard to say that you're standing for the Constitution when you have a bunch of old nuns who are basically asking for their First Amendment rights to be protected, and you're going to say no as the big bad federal government led by President Obama? It's not going to work. This is going to be very interesting to watch. What do you think? You know where to find me on Twitter, LennyMcAllister, Facebook, Two Walls, same guy. Would love to get your feedback. I appreciate all the retweets and all the feedback on Twitter. It's been a long day, PCNC already. Already also had a chance to do our segment on the barbershop on National Public Radio. Check that out. NPR.org. Look for the barbershop. Enjoyed that as always. As well, if you're in the Pittsburgh area, Night Talk, get to the point, 8 o'clock this evening, PCNC. Looking forward to talking to the guests and looking forward to having you join us. In the meanwhile, have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Stay safe, stay warm. You know I love you. I'll talk to you Monday. TCNGB, take care and God bless.